What's up, guys, and welcome back to another Migration Minute brought to you by the Wild Faith Podcast. Checking in again here because it is early October. And while we've had some, few flocks kind of trickle through I still think the big migration still feels like it's holding up north. Today I just wanted to talk a little bit about some questions that kind of come up in my own head, so I'm going to try and answer them myself. And just kind of what I've been seeing out on the river thus far this year. And kind of go from there, kind of just digging into weather, adjusting setup when, ducks are kind of few and far between or just kind of still a little stagnant. It does look like this upcoming weekend into early next week, we're going to have some really good cold weather, talking low 20s at night, north winds, so it should be on. But first one up, I just want to talk about weather and migration. And like I said, honestly, this weather's kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time. We've had milder temps, lighter winds, and not a real hard cold front. We've had a couple decent smaller ones, getting down into the mid to high 30s. But, I think that's what's probably keeping a lot of birds up north, higher up in Minnesota, the Dakotas, and even in Canada yet. Even just looking on some of the TikTok comments we've had, that's what a lot of guys have been seeing across the Midwest, is just getting stagnant. A lot of local birds yet, some trickling in, but really waiting for that true big cold front. Getting really, really cold and getting some really good hard push down from up north. But here on the river, it's still, like I said, a lot of mostly locals, woodies, gadwalls, a few early mallards, but nothing major quite yet. I think, everyone wants probably a date in mind of November 5th is the date that's going to happen. Well, if the weather's not cooperating, the ducks aren't cooperating, it's not going to be November 5th, right? It could be November 15th. It could be October 30th. So you just never know. But, without these cold fronts, I think that continually stack up. We get one small one and then it gets hot again. Like I think it was 60 a couple days ago. You can kind of feel it while the ducks, how they act, when we're hunting, kind of just stale. They've seen lots of pressure. You might get a few smaller groups that work early, but by mid-morning, they're just kind of trading back and forth between their safe zones. And that's kind of what I've seen, so far out on the river this far this year. And realistically, it's my first year hunting the river. So, I obviously don't have even close of an idea of figuring it all out yet, but learning each day. So, right now, obviously it's just like deer hunting. Like the game is patience and scouting. You got to find maybe those little back channels or flooded little pockets that still may have some few birds using them. The flooded pockets piece is tough here. The river is pretty low. It's kind of crazy when you're out there right now and you're seeing deadheads or stumps or all sorts of different stuff sticking out of the water, and you're like, wow, I flew right over that, when in the summertime when the water is high. So definitely, the river is quite low. So like I said, the flooded pockets piece might be challenging, but I'm not saying that's not impossible. And you just got to be willing to grind it out, right? This is just kind of the grindy part of the season. This is where a lot of guys kind of just start to wane out, I think, a little bit. But, the big flights, the big migrations that's coming. But that's just that in-between stretch of, consistency matters more than limits at this point. Like, just get out there. Maybe you're only shooting ones and twosies, but, you're still out there in God's country and you're learning. That's number one. And that's the biggest thing for me is, like, even if I'm not even shooting a bird, at least I learned something. Okay, well, maybe my hide was shit. Maybe my decoys weren't set up right. I had flared birds or whatever, maybe it just wasn't positioned right with wind or sun or whatever. So, at this time of the year, just like deer hunting, I am watching every weather app. I think I have like 4 different weather apps I have on my phone. And just watching for that real, like I said, that real first northwest blow of cold weather, where you get those 10 degrees colder, cold, hard, stiff wind. And, overnight that can really change up the whole entire game. Right. And so So until then, it's just staying sharp and ready for when that switch flips over, and it's coming. I like I said, we got some really good cold temps coming up here this weekend, which is the 8th, and then got some buddies coming up from southeastern Wisconsin this upcoming following weekend, the 14th and 15th. So hopefully we get a real good solid push down and can really smack them the next weekend as well. But then just the other piece I wanted to touch on here this morning is spread decoys. What am I doing? I'm not saying that this is right or wrong. I'm just saying this is what I'm doing based on what I'm seeing, and I'm learning. So I could be, like I said, I could be completely wrong. But when it's slower, right, like this, I definitely try and change up how I hunt. Maybe some guys run a big traffic spread to get a lot of attention, but maybe on the river it could work against you. Like I said, a lot of these birds are local, so they've seen every decoy spread from in the whole area, right? So I tend to go smaller, more natural. I think the other morning I ran a dozen teal and maybe a dozen mallard. I think maybe I just did 8 mallards and then I threw out a mojo spinner. And so, just kind of family groups, few pockets, groups here and there. Kind of, like I said, mixing up the species a little bit just to break it up. And then the goal is just kind of obviously realism. Anytime you're throwing out a decoy spread, it's just if you throw out, let's say 5 dozen decoys and they haven't seen 5 dozen 5 dozen ducks in a hole in all year, well, they're going to know probably something's up, right? So you just got to hunt them like what you've been seeing. If you're seeing if you're putting out there what you've been seeing, your odds are probably going to go a little bit up. And I tend to try and keep my calling light too. Definitely have gotten way more into, getting. I'm just practicing on my calling this year, and so it's kind of tough to not want to call a lot when you're out there and you're learning. Similar to turkey hunting, where, oh, I could try this call. I was working on it at home, but it's like, what is hunting the best time to try out that? Maybe not, right? Like you could try it and it might work like a golden flute, so you just never know. And so I, just kind of reading the ducks, listening, right? I think you kind of get into that mid-morning, even into the later morning where, some of the ducks are starting to find their little pocket if they haven't been shot at yet, right? And so just listen. Look, what are they doing? What are the wood ducks? How do the wood ducks sound? What are the mallards saying? And then just trying to mimic that. That's what I think made me a lot better of a turkey caller too, is just shutting up a little bit and just listening to what the birds actually do. And talking to guys like Cal and Elliot and all the other guys that we've had on the past, that has helped me a ton of just like picking their brain a little bit on what they do, how they call, how they set up all this kind of stuff. And so, when the birds are lower, like I've said this whole time here, is just, it's not being the loudest caller or the biggest spread. It's just, I think, being the one that feels the most believable. Smaller spread, maybe a little less calling. And, this is the time of the year that teaches us discipline. When you can scratch out a few birds during the lull, it means when that front hits, then fresh birds pour in, you're ready to go, you're tuned up, and that's when it's time to make it count, right? And so that's all I got this week. Like I said, I want to talk a little bit about weather, migration, what's going on in my neck of the woods, and then just kind of how I've been running the spread a little bit and hitting the calls. So that's all I got for the migration minute this week. A little bit of advice. The last piece of advice, for whatever it's worth, I would just say stay patient, stay hidden, keep watching those weather maps, because when the next front hits, it might be the one that just breaks loose in a hurry. And so good luck out there. Stay safe. God bless. And we'll see you next Thursday for the next Migration Minute. Thank you for joining us on this journey through faith in the great outdoors. We hope today's episode has inspired you to seek God's presence in the wilderness and deepen your connection with nature. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to the Wild Faith Podcast on your favorite platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. By subscribing, you'll never miss an episode, and you'll continue to be a part of the Wild Faith Podcast community. We'd also love to hear from our listeners, so please don't hesitate to reach out with your questions, comments, or topic suggestions. You can connect with us on social media or through our website. Your feedback is important to us and helps us improve and tailor our content to better serve you. And always remember, the great outdoors isn't just a playground for hunting and fishing. It's a sanctuary for finding solace and spiritual renewal. As you gear up for that next adventure, I pray you find God's presence in the crackling of a campfire, the thrill of reeling in your catch, or the quiet solitude found in nature. Until next time, thank you for listening to the Wild Faith Podcast. Take care, and God bless.